You're now listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.
Hello, Rockies. This is Sarah Jane Maroney, your host. And today we are speaking with Congressman Gabe Evans, who is serving as Colorado's 8th Congressional District in the House of U.S. Representatives, which includes most of Adams County, Weld County, north to including Greeley, and even part of Larimer County. Prior to serving in public office, Gabe served his country in the U.S. Army, the Colorado Army National Guard, and as an Arvada police officer. Gabe spent 12 years in the Army, where he completed a combat deployment to the Middle East and served in Operation Enduring Freedom, ultimately reaching the rank of captain. In the Colorado Army National Guard, Gabe was stationed at Buckley Air Force Base, where he served as a UH-60 Black Hawk helicopter pilot and company commander, responding to wildfires and search and rescues throughout Colorado. In 2011, Gabe joined the Arvada Police Department, where he reached the rank of lieutenant before retiring to run for public office in the Colorado State Legislature and House District 48. The grandson of Mexican immigrants, Gabe is a Colorado native who truly understands the beauty and responsibility of the American dream. Gabe and his wife Ann own and operate a family farm in southern Weld County, where they raise their 2 boys. We welcome him. Hello, Congressman Evans. Thank you for being here.
Of course. Thanks for having me on.
So, this is your freshman term in Congress, and you've gone off to Washington. How are you finding it?
Well, it's fortunate that I came out of the state legislature. As we say around here, the rules of the game are about 90% of the same. It's just a little bit bigger stage and a little bit brighter lights. But being down in the state capitol in Colorado really was a great stepping stone to be able to learn the issues, learn the stakeholder groups, learn just how a legislative body functions. And so I'm not really struggling to understand what does a committee do, or how does a bill go through the process, or how do you put together the stakeholder coalitions, and how do you socialize an idea or a concept with my colleagues. So a lot of that stuff, again, very, very similar to being down at the state legislature. And so that makes it very exciting for me, because it means I can truly focus on the issues that we need to be doing work on here in Colorado. And I think that most folks are pretty familiar with that issue set. It's incredibly expensive. Crime is out of control. Unfortunately, our education system isn't doing so very good, when 60% of Colorado third graders can't read at the third grade level, and 70% of our eighth graders can't do eighth grade math. And so being able to work on those things like public safety, like affordability, like making sure that our kids are getting a good education so they're postured for success when they move into the workforce, those are all the things that I'm super excited to be able to continue to focus on, and be able to really jump right into the deep end of the pool to be able to deliver results on.
Yeah, that you had quite a tight election there.
Yeah, it was a nail biter that lived up to the billing. But again, I think the priorities of the district shone through, and being able to deliver priorities. Let's just talk public safety for a minute. Colorado is unfortunately the number 2 state in the nation for teenagers overdosing and dying on fentanyl. I saw that during my 10 years as a police officer. We're the number 1 state in the nation again, 3 of the last 5 years running, for motor vehicle theft. And that has an incredibly negative impact, not just on people's everyday lives and quality of life, but that has a negative impact on cost of living. Because when you have cars that are being stolen left and right, when you have a crime that's running rampant and out of control, that has a negative impact on the economy, on insurance rates, and the list goes on, to the point where the Common Sense Institute here in Colorado, which again is a bipartisan think tank, the Common Sense Institute has estimated that it's around $27 billion annually of lost economic productivity just in Colorado as a result of crime. And so being able to do things like deliver border security and deliver solutions that actually allow our state and local law enforcement to be able to work with their federal counterparts to be able to get poisonous drugs like fentanyl out of our community, be able to get the criminals who are dealing this, the cartels, the organized gangs out of our community, is an area where Congress absolutely has a duty and an obligation to act. And so again, with my background as a Latino, my abuelo is from Mexico. My mom's a first generation American. Being able to speak to border security, being able to speak to community safety, being able to speak to keeping our families safe from the scourge of drugs like fentanyl, and from organizations like In Colorado, the Sinaloa cartel and the Jalisco cartel are the two main traffickers of fentanyl, along with other gangs that have made the news like Tren de Aragua, whose national command and control center is in Colorado as a result of these sanctuary city and state policies that prevent state and local law enforcement from being able to work with their federal counterparts to get these criminals and get these drugs out of our community. And so, with the new administration and in Congress, I think we've seen some very positive movement in that already. In my district, in the northern Denver suburbs, around 50 known Tren de Aragua members or their associates were immediately apprehended and removed from our community just within a couple of weeks of the new administration taking office. And so being able to bring legislation and focus on those issues is something that I'm super excited about. Already have a couple of official actions that I've taken in that space. The Uplift Act, unhandcuffing police officers to locate and interdict foreign transgressors, is a direct shot at the sanctuary state policies in Colorado that prohibit state and local law enforcement from even being able to coordinate with federal authorities if immigration is potentially involved or implicated in a case. And so, of course, that makes Colorado a sanctuary only for gangs and criminal organizations like the Sinaloa cartel, like the Jalisco cartel, like Tren de Aragua. And so, among other things, what my Uplift Act does is it extends hold harmless protections to state and local law enforcement officers who choose to share and collaborate information with their federal counterparts in cases of known or suspected criminals who are committing other crimes in the community and who are illegally present in the United States. That's just a quick snapshot of some of the public safety things that I've been working on in the first, I think it's officially 3 months today, the 3 months that I've been in Congress.
Wow. Yeah, we've had CSI on actually the last two episodes. So, one question before we get into a little bit more of the Medicaid issues. You are in a federal situation that is definitely red, and yet Colorado is quite blue. Have you found any contrast in the two environments in regards to that?
Yeah, well, I mean, that's a great segue into the Medicaid conversation. As I think most folks know, the federal government underwrites a significant portion of the cost for Medicaid. However, it's the states that actually administer the program on a day-to-day basis. And so what we see at the federal government is that there is a very newfound commitment to being able to protect Medicaid, and we have to protect the financial viability of Medicaid for people who rely on those critical services. And so being able to protect Medicaid by being able to cut out and find the fraud, waste, and abuse that exists in the program. The Government Accounting Office, GAO, for instance, has recently done a study that shows that annually Medicaid has somewhere around 31 billion, that's billion with a B, $31 billion in improper payments. And so being able to put guardrails around fraud, waste, and abuse in the program, that actually gets the money back and the resources back to the people who need it and who rely on it, the doctors and the patients that are depending on these critical services. And so that's a huge component of where the focus is at the federal level. But unfortunately, we're not seeing that reciprocated by the state of Colorado. Again, that actually administers the program. The feds write the check to the state, but the state's the one that actually implements the program. And in Colorado, I mean, we just saw the recent news from the Denver Post, where they highlighted that in Colorado, about around $7 million has been paid to dead people via the Medicaid program. We've seen the millions of dollars in Medicaid that are going to people who aren't even legally present in the United States. And so just basic fraud, waste, and abuse prevention measures that would cut out payments like that is critically important to being able to protect and be good stewards of these taxpayer resources so that we can get it to the doctors and we can get it to the patients who actually rely on these programs. And so as Congress, I'll give you a piece of legislation that I've introduced. The Medicare and Medicaid Fraud Prevention Act. It is a bipartisan piece of legislation that says if a doctor or a provider, somebody that is in the Medicaid program as a provider, if that person passes away, we need to have a formalized process by which their provider number is removed from the Medicaid or Medicare program so that that number, again, for a deceased provider is not active in the system anymore, because if it remains active after the provider is already deceased, that creates a vulnerability by which malicious actors can go use that number to be able to get illegal or malicious fraudulent payments routed to wherever they're going to send that money to. So just things like that to clean up the program, that is the focus of Congress. And it would be really nice if the state of Colorado would be able to join us in that effort to actually protect the program instead of what they're doing, which is continuing to double down on things like payments to illegal immigrants, people who aren't even lawfully present in the United States.
Yeah, absolutely. So, and I guess what would your reassurances be to someone who is in this particular arena that we're talking about, Medicaid, scared that their Medicaid is going to go by the wayside, but maybe that even extends to some of President Trump's actions regarding the Department of Education, of people saying, oh my goodness, this is going to hurt everyone. It just seems like there's a lot of conflicting information.
Yeah, for folks that are in that Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security space, the president has been very, very clear about this. Don't touch lawful benefits to lawful beneficiaries. And so the president has to sign any piece of legislation that Congress sends him for it to go into effect. And regardless of what you think of the president, from a self-interest perspective, it's incumbent on him to be able to follow through with those statements that, I checked the other day, it's on the official White House website. That is his policy position on Medicaid, Medicare, Social Security. And so that's why I led with the conversation and the tone of the conversation in Congress right now, which is very much reflective and understanding of that policy guidance from the president, who again has to sign whatever piece of legislation we send to his desk. And that's why I mentioned again, just for instance, that GAO number from the federal government highlighting $31 billion annually in improper or other fraudulent types of payments just in the Medicaid system. A number that people may hear being thrown around is $880 billion. That is a part of the budgetary process that Congress is going through right now called reconciliation. So, reconciliation is a budgetary process by which you effectively have to pass the bill twice in order to get it to the president's desk. So, the first part of the process is a reconciliation resolution. There is no policy associated with that resolution. All it's doing is establishing top line budget numbers. So if this was a household budget, it would be things like, this is how much we can spend a month on groceries. This is how much we spend a month on housing. This is how much we spend a month on gas. It's doing the same thing for Congress, and it's setting a budget effectively for each of the committees that are involved in the reconciliation process. And it'll say things like the Homeland Security Committee, which I sit on. The Homeland Security Committee, we know we need more border security, so the Homeland Security Committee can spend an additional $90 billion over the next 10 years to be able to improve border security. Another committee that I sit on, Energy and Commerce. Energy and Commerce has jurisdiction over about 70% of the US economy, to include things like Medicaid. So Energy and Commerce has a directive to it to find, right now the number is $880 billion over the next 10 years in cost savings. And so what's happening is that number, that $880 billion being conflated as being cuts to Medicaid. Completely false. That $880 billion is what's called a top line number to the Energy and Commerce Committee that says over the next 10 years, and again, this is over a 10-year period, over the next 10 years, Energy and Commerce is charged with finding $880 billion in cost savings across the length and the breadth of everything that falls under our jurisdiction, which again includes 70% of the US economy and also programs like Medicaid. So we got to find $880 billion in cost savings as it's written now. We don't know if that's going to be the final number. It has to pass through the House, then it has to pass through the Senate. The House and the Senate have to agree on the number. After that part is done, then we go back to the beginning of the process And then we actually have to craft the policies that meet that top line number. So where we are right now in football terms, we're on our own 10-yard line with 90 yards of football left to play. There are no policies that have been passed. There's no policies that are officially attached to the reconciliation resolution. We are still just establishing those top line numbers to the committees. Once the Senate and the House agree on what those top line instructions are, then we will have the policy conversations to come up with the actual procedures to meet whatever that number is. And so, again, understanding that there's right now, per the federal government's own assessment, $31 billion annually of improper payments in Medicaid. Well, you multiply that out over 10 years, that's $310 billion just right there in cost savings by getting fraud, waste, and abuse, improper payments out of the Medicaid system. There's other options. Again, none of this stuff has been officially passed yet. No policies have been decided. But some of the other options in Medicaid that are being discussed are things like there is a 90-day grace period in Medicaid before someone has to show proof of citizenship. So I've verified this in Colorado. An individual can be added to Medicaid, run up a bill for 89 days, and then be pulled back out of the Medicaid system. That is entirely lawful, and that doesn't even count officially as payments toward illegal immigrants because you never even verified their immigration status because there's a 90-day grace period. So being able to close that 90-day grace period, that doesn't impact benefits to lawful beneficiaries, that protects the integrity of the system. It saves us billions of dollars. And again, these are the things that are being discussed in order to protect the long-term financial viability of Medicaid so that it is available to the patients and to the providers who depend on it. And again, I've had these conversations with people in Colorado, officials who actually administer the program or providers who actually provide the medical care. I talked to one last week who said, "Oh yeah, we we knew that we were going to be doing thousands and thousands and thousands of dollars of medical procedures on this individual who wasn't even lawfully present in the United States because they added him yesterday." And it's another 88 days before we can even ask for proof of citizenship. But they're in my clinic right now or on my operating table right now, and I'm giving medical care to somebody that I know is not lawfully present in the United States. So being able to close loopholes like that, that's the conversation in Congress. And being able to try to get the state of Colorado to come along with us and actually protect lawful benefits to American taxpayers rather than what Colorado is doubling down on doing right now, which is things like there's a bill in the state legislature I looked at that actually raises fees on private insurance in order to raise tens of millions of dollars to be able to go spend on illegal immigrants in the United States. That's what's happening in the Medicaid space right now.
Okay, and so that sounds quite reassuring to anyone who does have benefits legally and reasonably, and that they wouldn't be taken away. Could you speak a little bit to the Department of Education fears that people have that is going on in Colorado?
Again, 60% of Colorado kids at the third grade level aren't reading at the third grade level. 70% of those kids, when they make it to eighth grade, aren't able to do math at the eighth grade level. And so it's clear that we need to have a just a very honest conversation about what is the ultimate point of our education system. And to me, as a parent, as a father, I know that parents, students, and teachers need to be at the absolute center of that conversation, with students ultimately occupying the most important position in our whole education system. And so it's very clear the way that we're doing things right now aren't working. And so, as a strong advocate for educational choice, I'm going to, of course, thoughtfully consider anything that puts parents, teachers, and students back in the driver's seat with the ultimate understanding that making sure that we educate students and we reverse this abysmal trend of 60% of Colorado third graders not being able to read at the third grade level and 70% of Colorado eighth graders not being able to do eighth grade at the math level, that is the ultimate problem. And any conversation in this space that does not start with that as the premise and the thing that we need to fix, I would argue we need to reframe that conversation and make education about the kids, educating our kids, making sure that we were having an actual effective program with students, parents, and teachers in the driver's seat to make sure that we're delivering that education.
I think again, most parents are it's parents of special needs children think that their programs are going to be taken away, or it's IDEA, those kind of things that people are concerned about. And yet my understanding is those are not affected in Colorado because the federal funds are given to Colorado, and then Colorado can decide how to use those. Is that correct?
Yeah, so a lot of these conversations at the federal level are about how do we drive more resources to the state, and how do we cut out a lot of the bureaucracy and the red tape at the federal level. You can go look at charts. Again, you mentioned the Common Sense Institute. Common Sense Institute has some great data in this space that highlights student growth in the education system related to administrative growth and bureaucratic and red tape growth in the educational system. And you can see there's just been a massive spike in administrators and bureaucrats and red tape in the in the education system. And of course, that has a negative impact on the students and on the teachers who are actually trying to deliver the education that kids deserve when you have so much bloated bureaucracy saddled on the program. And so a lot of the conversations in Congress are how do we drive more resources back to the state? How do we get more resources into the classroom? How do we get more resources to parents with kids that have special needs? And how do we make sure that we're adequately resourcing those actual user level, boots on the ground parents, students, and teachers? And that we're finding those resources by being able to cut out just some of the astronomical growth that we've seen in the bureaucracy that's not actually actively and effectively engaged in delivering education and educational resources to our kids.
Wonderful. So you got to sit, you sort of subbed in from my Colorado understanding on the congressional hearing when you were talking to Mayor Johnston. Do you think that there are going to be further implications or ramifications? I know there was a Florida rep that turned over some information to the DOJ, but I guess what would your sense be after having been able to sit on that committee and ask those questions?
Yeah, so that was the oversight committee. The congressional lingo is waved on, but you're exactly right. I basically subbed in on the committee because I went to the committee chair and I said, "Look, I was a cop for 10 years, a little over 10 years in the Denver metro area. I know what's going on in the community, and I have some questions I would like to ask the mayor." So if you didn't see the particular line of questioning, it was based around the FBI fingerprint card, because what the mayor and the governor say all the time is, of course, we want to work with the federal government to be able to get violent criminals out of our community if they're here illegally. Well, as a cop, I know that if state and local law enforcement arrests somebody for any other crime, burglarizing a house, dealing drugs, stealing, anything like that, part of that arrest process involves taking fingerprints so that we have positive identification for that individual. And one of the questions on the standard FBI fingerprint card that's been around for years and years and years and years is, what is the citizenship? What's the nationality of that individual? We have to collect that information because we have treaties with other countries by which we have to have consular or embassy notification if you arrest somebody from another country. So collecting that information is a routine standard process that's been around, again, since I became a cop in 2011. And I had heard that the Denver Police Department had been directed not to collect that information. Again, required on the standard FBI fingerprint card, which anybody that gets arrested typically gets fingerprinted. So if cops can't even ask that standard administrative question that's been around for decades and that's required because of some of the international treaties that we have regarding consular notification, if we can't even collect that information, how in the world is the mayor and the governor going to actually be able to follow through on their oft repeated claim of being willing to work with the federal government to get violent criminals out of our community that are here illegally if we don't even identify those individuals at the point of arrest, because our law enforcement officers have been directed by their political leadership not to even ask that question, because then it would highlight if somebody is dealing drugs or stealing cars or committing thefts or other crimes and is illegally present in the community. That was my basic line of questioning to the mayor. And of course, we were able to get our hands on the January 2025 training bulletin that the Denver Police Department sent out to all of their officers, directing them not to collect that information. And so being able to highlight that all of the words that come from the mayor and come from the governor are absolutely nothing but smoke and mirrors designed to detract attention in a different direction, away from the fact that the policies and the laws that the mayor and the governor have put into place prohibit law enforcement officers from being able to even identify people that are committing crimes in our community and are also here illegally. And so that the oft repeated claim that Colorado law enforcement will work with the federal government to get violent criminals out of our community that are here illegally is completely a made up statement that is not actually able to be implemented in reality, because we don't even collect that information oftentimes at the point of arrest. And those arrests, of course, are made on probable cause that somebody has committed a crime in the community. Immigration status has absolutely no bearing in an arrest if somebody is caught running out of a Home Depot with $2,000 worth of DeWalt tools.
A final question for you then, since you're sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee. Colorado has a bunch of goals about zero emissions and things like this. We've had done a few interviews on that subject matter. What do you think the possibility is in terms of Colorado actually accomplishing any of that? And I know that recently in Colorado Springs, utilities basically said, we're not going to make it. We're not going to be able to hit these goals. So what are your thoughts on, again, this difference between the goals of the federal government versus the state of Colorado and those being in different parties?
Yeah. So whenever we're talking about goals around energy generation and zero emissions in Colorado, it's supposed to be by 2050 is the goal for all of these things to kick into effect. And so I've had a lot of conversations, both sitting on the Energy and Commerce Committee in Congress, and then before that being the ranking member on the State Energy and Environment Committee in the state capitol. And here's the basic numbers that I've been told. A 50% emissions reduction is pretty easy to get. We have that technology. It's fairly easy to get. It's fairly cost effective as well. To be able to go from 50 to 70%, 75%, 80%, somewhere in that range, we mostly have the technology, but it's really, really expensive to be able to implement it. And to get that last 10, 15, 20% somewhere in there, that's basically impossible at this point, in terms of both the technology to make it available and also the cost to be able to do it. And so I think we've seen most of the low hanging fruit we've already been able to capture a lot of that in Colorado. And so from this point on, if Colorado continues on this track of it doesn't really follow the science. We need energy. We need more energy. We make the cleanest, most environmentally and socially responsible energy anywhere on the planet here in the United States and in Colorado. And to be able to say absolutely no emissions, zero emissions, that's just not a scientifically or fiscally attainable goal. And ultimately, if Colorado doesn't follow the science in this space, the people that are going to pay the price are the ratepayers. Let's just look at some quick statistics around electricity. Right now, the electricity that comes out of the wall socket in Colorado, because of the portfolio of different generating sources that creates and fuels the grid in Colorado, the carbon footprint for electricity that comes out of Colorado, comes out of the wall socket in Colorado, is about 1,200 pounds of carbon per megawatt hour. Megawatt's a big unit of electricity. If that electricity, that same amount of electricity, was generated 100% from natural gas, you would actually have about a 40% reduction in the carbon footprint of generating that same amount of electricity. So if Colorado was truly serious about reducing emissions and producing clean, safe, affordable, responsible energy, Colorado would be pursuing an all of the above approach that welcomed things like natural gas production in Colorado, because natural gas right now is about 40% more efficient than the electricity that comes out of the wall. And so being able to, again, just highlight that message and highlight the critical importance for being able to protect safe, affordable, reliable electricity and energy generation from all of the above sources that meet that criteria is incredibly important in making sure that we have a reliable grid and making sure that we have affordable prices for the ratepayers. And Colorado's greenhouse gas roadmap, like I said, the first 50% reductions, that's fairly easy to get. Anything beyond that, you're going to see a dramatic uptick in price. You're going to see a dramatic uptick in cost pass on to the ratepayer because the technology and the science just isn't there to be able to support that. And so we need to do things like produce more natural gas in Colorado. Again, natural gas is about 40% cleaner and more efficient right now today than the electricity that is generated and comes out the 120 volt plug in the wall.
Wow. Well, thank you for that. I have learned so much, Congressman Evans. I really appreciate it. Hopefully, we can have you on again to talk about more of these issues. And we're so glad for your service in all aspects, military, police, and now that you're serving us in the Congress.
So glad to be on with you. If anybody needs help in my official capacity, gabeevans.house.gov is the website. So definitely go on, and we're here to serve any constituents.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
Thank you for listening to the Engage the Rockies podcast, your go-to podcast for local and state issues concerning Colorado.